Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends.
The prosecuting attorney was considering vehicular manslaughter charges against Mr. Martin, and I gasped. He said, in every case I've ever been involved, and it's been hundreds, I'm a 37-year veteran of the police. It's been hundreds. The family always wants more penalty, not less.
Yeah.
He said, when he came at me with vehicular manslaughter charges, the trooper said something moved in me. And he said, well, I hadn't talked to your family yet. He said, but I pushed back and I told him, not here, not this case. You see, the same spirit that was working in me to get me in the courtroom was already working in the trooper to alter where this thing had originally been considered for heading. And so his charge was reduced from vehicular manslaughter to reckless driving. That's what he was charged with. Big difference.
Wow, that is a huge difference.
And then the trooper said, there's something else you need to know about me. He said, just a couple years ago, I lost my 24-year-old son in a motor vehicle crash. He said, I'm still struggling to deal with the circumstances of this. He said, I'm still mad at God. And you walk in here and you're going to pay a man's fine? And he got up and he walked away from me, shaking his head in disbelief.
Wow. Wow. You know, this is an unbelievable story. I'm talking with J.T. Clark, mybrotherscrossing.org, telling his story about an incredible incident and how God works through forgiveness. I'm so glad you're with us. You know, here on Life Support, like, we tell stories, and this is an incredible story. And so you had this accident, your brother, your sister-in-law killed. You're not even a believer at this point.
That's right.
And now God's all of a sudden working through everyone. He's calling you to do strange and weird things in the eyes of the world. Now, by this point, were you a believer yet when you went into that courtroom?
No,
Not yet.
no, I had not accepted a relationship. Certainly a lot of stuff was stirring around in my mind that I couldn't even process. I couldn't even understand. So many, I used the term unbelievable. You just said it a moment ago. I used the term unbelievable a lot in these early days and even in the months after the court case. And I had to take that out of my vocabulary and replace it with miraculous because God was at work in this and I didn't understand it at the time. But like I said a moment ago, it's just everything about it has turned my life right side up. And my brother and his wife could have made it safely home that night, and they could have died of heart attacks in their sleep and be gone just the same. But how God has used this to really impact lives for eternity, it's just it's just hard to wrap my mind around it.
So tell me how God has used it, because you've been able to tell the story in some amazing ways, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been profound. I mean, I was after things played out in the courtroom, after the judge heard what I was there to do, that he accepted a charge of improper driving, and he fined Mr. Martin. He fined him $5.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's an element of the story people just can't believe. I couldn't believe it when it happened. I'm thinking this is going to be at least thousands of dollars. I didn't know what the full ramifications were, but then to hear, and so in that moment, Pastor Paul, God bound C.J. Martin and me into a covenant relationship. I didn't even know what the word covenant meant at that point. So things were, and as we went to pay the clerk, he asked me how my mom was doing, and he asked me how my brother's daughter was doing, and then he invited me to his church. And all of a sudden I haven't been to church in years and want no part of it. And all of a sudden I'm faced with the prospect of going to the church pastor by the man that was involved in the death of my brother and his wife at the church building that sits within sight of the scene of the wreck. And if I can say this, and I don't mean anything by it, but it's a church of color. I'm the only, for all intents and purposes, I'm the only white. It's not a big church, but I'm the only. And I just had all kinds of apprehension. I don't want to go to church. This is not, this is not the life I. And then to do, and so the church is about an hour from where I live, and when I showed up that first Sunday, it was 2 Sundays after the court case that I showed up there. And I had, so much anxiety and so much hesitation about even going up. I got to the building at 10 minutes to 8 in the morning because I didn't know what time they started. Well, I don't know. I just know, they're in church all day kind of thing. It's a kind of
Let that be a lesson to all of us church people. Don't
yeah.
know everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I did. I showed up there and the next Sunday I went again, but this time I was not alone. My brother's daughter and her family came with me, and my 78-year-old mother made the trip down from Northern Virginia, and she also attended. And CJ talked after he preached the service. He talked about how the enemy was battling him and how he was struggling with his mental health and considering suicide, paranoid, PTSD, all manner of things that he was wrestling with in the aftermath. And he said every time he'd be pushed towards the edge, the Clark Family, Trash Ministry, or House of Purpose would show up in some way, and it's as if God used them to reach down, lift me up, and save my life. And when he spoke those words, my 78-year-old mother stood up on one side of the church, and his 86-year-old mother stood up on the other side of the church, and they met in the middle aisle and embraced one another. And we have no idea what they said to one another, but they were speaking of mother's love. You could see the countenance on their faces. Months later, CJ would ask me, "Did you see what your mom did for me that day?" And I said, "No, CJ, I missed it." He said, "After the service was over, she came up to me and she took my face in her hands. And she said, I just can't imagine what you've been going through. I just can't imagine all that you've had to deal with. I don't want this to destroy your life." And he says, as she's saying this to him, he's like, "Woman, how can you say this to me? You lost your son and you're worried about how I'm doing?" And she went on to tell him that she loved him and forgave him. And forgiveness set her free because she was dying every day from the moment she heard her firstborn was killed.
Of course.
And now she began thriving and living again, and it's been something. So the next right after that happened, CJ invited me to the altar and asked me if I had anything I'd like to say, and I said, I've been lukewarm Christian at best my whole life. I don't even know what made me say I was a lukewarm. You'd have to heat me up to get to lukewarm.
Yeah.
But I went on to say, from now on, all that changes. From now on, here am I, send me. And when I declared that, I did not know that was a Bible verse. And of course, I've come to understand it's Isaiah 6 and 8. And the Lord asked, "Who will go for us?" And everything about my life has been changed or is being changed. 2 Sundays after that, I was standing in the pulpit of another church, and that's where I've been ever since. I went from not being in church, want nothing to do with it, and now my wife and I are teaching 7 to 9 Bible studies a week, and we're preaching 1 to 3 services a week. Wherever God opens the door for us to go, we don't ask, we don't solicit. God, you open the door, you create the opportunity, and that's where we'll go.
Wow. And this is only 10 years ago. Like now, to some, 10 years may seem like a long time. But when you've been through a traumatic event like that, 10 years is like nothing. It's like, I bet for me, it's like it happened yesterday sometimes, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes,
And
sir.
and look at what God's done in that short period of time, not only in your life, but in the life of all of these other people that you're describing, not to mention the fact now you're influencing people in all of these amazing ways, including preaching and teaching Bible studies and the whole thing. It's like only God can do that kind of thing.
Yes. When CJ approached me in 2017, he said, "Do you feel called? Do you feel called to the ministry?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do." And he said, "Well, I'd like to offer you to be ordained as a minister here at House of Purpose." And he said, "You're already doing the work.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm not doing anything for you that you're not already doing." And he did caution me. He said, "There's some people that won't accept or how this has come about. You're not formally trained. You haven't been to theology school, whatever. But and I'm not diminishing any of that. But he's so August 27th of 2017, I was ordained as a minister, licensed and ordained through House of Purpose. And one of the amazing things about that." I had the opportunity to speak at the oldest African American church in Washington, D.C., Father's Day of 2017. And 10 weeks later, I was giving my trial sermon to be ordained, and as we sat at the altar and the worship team sang their selection of songs, when they finished, CJ stepped to the pulpit to introduce me. At least so I thought. And he said, "Well, we've got a surprise coming for JT that he doesn't know about, and it hasn't arrived yet. So we're going to ask the worship team to sing another song." And as they sang that next song, the front door of the church opened up, and a delegation from the oldest African American church in Washington, D.C. walked through the door. They heard I was being ordained as a minister and that we had had such an impact on them when we were at their church 10 weeks earlier that they wanted to send a delegation to bear witness to me becoming a minister of the gospel. Um, and it's moments like that. They drove 5 hours one way to hear a 1 hour sermon to turn around and drive 5 hours back, because of what God has done through all of this and is continuing to do in our lives.
Do you ever wonder, like, what life would be like if forgiveness hadn't been a part of
Oh
that?
my, yeah, yeah.
Because there are a lot of people who are in bondage to just the opposite reaction and emotions.
Yeah, I preached a message at a minimum security prison just last night and talked about some of those very principles. There was a secular study produced in 2023 that suggested that 98% of the world's mental health issues could be resolved if we would simply choose forgiveness. And again, that's a secular study. And I remember the first invitation I got to speak at a church on forgiveness, two weeks after my transformation, after my profession of faith, if you will. Um, and I thought to myself when I got that invitation, what in the world am I going to say to these people that are in church? They've got this forgiveness thing figured out. Oh boy,
Yeah.
I quickly learned the reality of that and how we carry these burdens into the house of God, and we walk around in that bondage each and every day. And his admonishment, his commandment to us is if we want to be forgiven, we have to forgive. And if we won't forgive, then he's not going to forgive. And that's such a bold declaration. And so I hear a lot of teachings and I hear a lot of things, and I'm not saying any of it's wrong, but one of the things I've really come to believe about forgiveness, paramount to everything else, is it's an act of obedience. And we have to forgive just simply whether we feel like it, whether it makes us feel good, whether it releases somebody from bondage, whether any of that is true, and it all can be. Most oftentimes it is, but above all, it's honoring our God for what He's done for us
Mhm.
by choosing to forgive other people.
Mhm.
And I've just seen it play out over and over. I was depressed and suicidal for 30 years. From the age of 13 to the age of 43, I did not want to live, and that was rooted in unforgiveness. And once I chose forgiveness in February of 2009, I have not been depressed or suicidal one day in over 16 years.
Wow. It's also something that you have to, I think, for me at least, it's an ongoing process. You know, I remember the my first words to the man who had killed our son was, "We're going to work on forgiving you," because I didn't feel like it would be an honest statement to say, like, this is all going to go away tomorrow.
Sorry.
Um, and so though forgiveness has been offered, there are still times when I'm reminded of things, or I'm reminded of a short sentence that he got that I thought it should have been more. And these different, these different little things you wrestle with.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like a constant work of God to continue to refine me through that process.
Praise God. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said. And it brings me back to that scripture in Matthew 18 where Peter's saying, how many times must I forgive? And
Yeah.
Jesus corrects him. And it's because things are going to come up again and it's going to bring a pain again. And it just simply means we have to choose to forgive again. And again, it's a process. It doesn't necessarily happen. That's why I was telling these guys at the correctional center last night. Some of you are hearing about forgiveness for the very first time, and for many of us, it's a badge of honor to hold on to the unforgiveness.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're warmed by that. on some level, and so um, as we're reminded of the reality of the things that happen in our lives, look, we wouldn't have you would not have chose to go through what you've gone through, and I certainly wouldn't have with my brother or the circumstances that led to my depression and suicidal ideation. I wouldn't have chosen those things. But the fact that God is using those things to bring about spiritual growth in my life and how he's maturing me in my faith, and he's using those situations to speak to people who are where I used to be, and I'm able to minister to and share, and they see somebody who's no longer depressed or suicidal, who no longer wants to end his life, and it gives them hope because many of those people are saddled right in that spot.
Yeah, and I bet
Some of these,
your brother would have, if he could have seen how God changed you and others. He probably would have said, okay, like I can live with this trade-off.
well, remember what he wrote the morning of the day of the wreck, if I could
Yeah.
give my life for one. And here's another oddity that we found uh, in the aftermath of everything. Uh, 6 hours to the minute of the time the accident was reported to have occurred, time stamped on his computer, he was looking at artistic images of the stoning of Stephen. It
Wow.
wasn't just a thought he had that morning. It was something that was with him through the day. And CJ Martin would say that when he got up that morning, he had a heaviness on him. He said something just did not feel right. He said, I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't explain what it was, but all day long, I just felt that there was this weight on me. And here's a reality. So uh, we celebrate the forgiveness that took place. And it began before I ever got into the picture. My niece did it within hours. But we celebrate the forgiveness that took place. Um, but God didn't just send me to the courtroom to forgive CJ. In
Mhm.
fact, I don't think that was it at all. What I was there for in the aftermath and thinking about this was to try to remove the barrier so he could receive the forgiveness my family had already extended to him. But he
Mhm.
didn't just send me to the courtroom for him, he had CJ in the courtroom for me.
Yeah.
And I've received far more. He'll tell you that me coming to court that day saved his life, but I've received far more from him than I ever gave to him. People say, well, what's your relationship with CJ like these days? Again, I just mentioned I'm ordained as a minister and he's our pastor. Our ministry office is located inside of his church building, which is now a separate building 2 miles up from where the wreck occurred. But they offered us a ministry office there to operate out of, and we get an opportunity on occasion to go. He pastors a church, so he can't go out the way we do. Last year we drove 97,000 miles to serve God in the places God sent us. But he did. Him and his wife were able to go to New York with us and minister for 5 days. They've been to Maryland with us. We may have an opportunity in the Bahamas coming up sometime soon, and it's just overwhelming and humbling just to see how God has worked through all of this.
Yeah. When we're done here, I'm going to have to find out about that Bahamas ministry opportunity because it gets pretty cold here in the winter.
Yes, sir.
Tell me about mybrotherscrossing.org.
Yeah, so in the aftermath of this, in fact, I went to CJ's church for the first time on November 8th, and I went to Trash Ministry for the first time on November 13th.
And trash ministry is what again?
It stands for Totally Redeemed Anointed Servants of the Most High. And I was just as out of place on Sunday at CJ's church as I was on Friday night at Trash Ministry. And of course, this was not my way of living at that point anyway. But after the service, the invited me to his study. And he wanted to tell me about his relationship with my brother. My brother was preaching a revival the night that Mike Price, the pastor of Trash Ministry, was saved. And he shared with me what their relate. He knew my brother in a way that I did not know my brother. And as we sat there, he said, "Do you know anything about the prophet Elijah and his servant Elisha?" And I said, Mike, no, I don't know anything about any of that. And he said, well, I'd encourage you to look that story up because after Elijah was gone, Elisha's ministry became even larger than Elijah's. And he said, I believe you're getting ready to have a ministry even larger than your brother's. And sitting there in that office that night, he tossed out the phrase "the crossing," how the biker community will use, let's meet up at the crossing. And so that's where my brother's crossing. And if you'll notice, the apostrophe comes after the S as in plural possessive, because this is not about my blood brother Bobby, but this is about all of us that have been affected by whatever form of tragedy, trauma, circumstance that we've had to cross through something. And so this work of My Brother's Crossing now, it's our full-time work. My wife and I do not have secular jobs, paychecks, or benefits. We just go as God makes a way, as He provides for us. We spend about half of our time behind bars ministering in jails, prisons, and the like. We spend about a quarter of our time in recovery centers, just going where, again, where the invitation comes from. We have spoken barns, fertilizer warehouses, churches, racetracks, wherever, whatever that looks like. And as I mentioned, we've driven 97,000 miles in the last year, and we ended up writing a book about this called In the Blink of an Eye: Forgiveness in Black and White. And the book was made into a movie, and the movie is called My Brother's Crossing, and it was set to release to hundreds of theaters nationwide Easter weekend of 2020, and COVID shut the theaters down, and the movie never got that kind of release. The money to make the movie came from prison, and there's another story in how that all came about. But the story of it, I just got a message from a man in Tennessee 2 days ago. And I was in prison last night, and they had shared the movie on a loop on their internal TV system. And one of the guys came into the service, and he said, "I've watched the movie 3 times in the last 2 days, and I just can't get enough of the messages of it." So yeah, it's been overwhelming just to hear those kinds of things.
Yeah, congratulations. It's really wonderful. One quick final question. If there's someone listening right now that's having a hard time forgiving someone, maybe even having a hard time forgiving themselves,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
sometimes the hardest thing.
yeah.
What counsel would you give them?
Yeah, the whole idea of forgiving ourselves, and what I really think that has to boil down to is us walking in the fullness of the forgiveness that Christ made available to us. For us to say that we're not worthy of it or we don't deserve it. None of us do, right? So He did it, and the only way it means anything is if we accept it. And when we walk in the fullness of the forgiveness that He made available to us, it allows us to walk in abundant life, the life that He promises us. And that's not a life of prosperity and luxury. It's a life of peace and joy and love and patience and grace and mercy and all of those things. So I would definitely encourage anybody who's struggling in this area to connect with a pastor or clergy. There's nothing, connect with somebody that you can confide in and share what you're dealing with, and just lay all that, and just ask God to continue to reveal it to you and help you walk through to get to the other side. And I promise, if you make that choice to do it, the real freedom is going to come then. The real freedom is going to
It's
come.
worth the journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a hard journey, but it's worth the journey.
Yes, sir.
It
Yes,
really is.
sir.
Well, JT, it's mybrotherscrossing.org. You have an amazing story. Thanks for telling it. Thanks for all you're doing. I just pray God's blessings on you as you go forward.
Thank you so much. We really do appreciate you helping to get the word out about the work we do, and maybe somebody will be encouraged. We always say we're a ministry of the one, being Jesus Christ for the one,
So I'm
and so
sure
just one
many,
person. Yes.
well, I'm sure many are going to be encouraged. So thank you. Thank you so much for that. And listen, if you're relating it all to what JT's saying, yeah, like he said, get in touch with someone, talk with someone, call a church, call a pastor, call a friend that you know understands God, or just hop on mybrotherscrossing.org. And we want to thank you for listening to Life Support.